So hi everyone, thank you so much for coming to Legat's 2020 think tank that's labeled Resilience. My name is Monique Taylor and I'm a senior interior designer with Legat Architects. For some of you who don't know Legat, we are a design practice specializing in planning, architecture, and interior design. A couple of the market segments that we focus on is healthcare, hospitality, contract, K through 12, higher education, and transportation facilities. We have a couple of mixed use projects and so very, very exciting things. So check out the website. A little bit of background on the think tank. So we do a think tank annually and it's orchestrated by Legat Architects, and each year we invite authorities from around the world and ask them to speak on their disciplines and about current trends in the market and everything that's related to their expertise and how those design impacts the current fields. In recent years, the symposium has featured discussions about biophilic and sustainable design. We'll hear Catie talk about that today, so that'll be very exciting. And then during last year's event, the think tank partnered with the Chicago Architecture Biennial. It was featured on Art Daily, Bustler, and in Architectural Products magazine. So this year's think tank topic, like I mentioned, is resilience. And resilience is essentially an ecology. Resilience implies the capacity of an ecosystem to respond to disturbance or invasion by recovering quickly, adapting to change, and evolving to thrive rapidly. And in this year of radical change, which we've all experienced the last 6 months, I think this topic is extremely relevant and important for the survival of not just architects and designers, but also all of us as humans. And then finally, as a reminder, we're all really excited about getting an AIA credit. So if you can email Justin Banda, which is jbanda@Legat, or just message him in the message chat, then he will set you up with that credit or your certification. And without further ado, I know we're super excited to invite or hear Catie Ryan speak. She's the director of projects for Terrapin Bright Green. She's very well known in this society. I myself am extremely excited as I'm stuttering, but she will talk about resilience in the environment and then designing for habitats for humans. And then Catie specializes then in biophilic design and human health in the built environment. She has worked with a ton of clients on biophilic design strategies and implementing including Cliff Bar, Google Interface, the Port of Portland, Salesforce, California Department of Natural Resources, and then the University of Virginia. And if that isn't enough, Catie has also written some amazing books. I'll just list a couple of them. A Biophilic Design Guide, 14 Patterns of Biophilic Design, and then her award-winning Economics of Biophilia. Catie goes above and beyond, and she's engaged in several efforts to advance scientific research and industry adaptation of biophilic design. She has served as an advisory on the International Living Future Institute on Biophilic Design Initiative, the GSA Workplace Advisory Group, and the Well Building Standards. So without further ado, Catie, thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to hearing about your amazing insight and expertise.
Thank you, Monique. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound perfect.
Great. And what do you see on the screen? Just to make sure I'm showing you the correct.
Your first slide, so it looks awesome.
Great. Okay. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the very thorough introduction, Monique. So I'd love to just jump in and give you guys kind of the state of what we're thinking about in biophilic design, and in light of the industry at the moment and the economy and our mental health. Resilience and biophilic design have been, the combination two or the overlay of the two have been a really hot topic. And so it's something that we've actually been really passionate about before, but it wasn't really getting the legs until recently. So I appreciate this opportunity to be able to talk to you all about it. So just want to start off, Nature Inside is the book that Monique had mentioned. And so I hope to be able to show you a few of the, or just touch on briefly some of the case studies that are in that book that relative to this topic. My understanding and the part of the framework for this presentation is to meet the learning objectives that were laid out previously for this session. So I'm going to touch briefly on principles of biophilic design and the relationship with resilience, and some of those elements and patterns that connect us, and maybe we might think of better ways to coordinate those design, design level, how to bridge that gap, and then looking at the actual application in some case studies to kind of reinforce that commitment for biophilic design and resilience at the human level as well as the ecosystem level, and then everywhere in between. And then and that also supports the effort to have this more global mission. So just as a background, biophilic design Biophilia is based on this premise that we are all innately connected to nature and with nature and natural systems. And biophilic design really incorporates the principles and patterns from nature to elevate the experiences of space and place in a way that has mental, physical, cognitive, and other health benefits. And I've outlined here 5 principles of biophilic design. These are from Stephen Keller and Liz Calabrese's book on designing on biophilic design that was issued in 2015, I believe. There are other variations of these principles, but I like to keep it tight, and so 5 is really just an easy way to talk about it. But the key issues or the key aspects of these principles are this idea of repeated and sustained engagement, human habitations relative to the natural world, emotional attachment to those places, positive interactions, not just with nature, but also with other people, because as we are part of nature. And then this idea of mutually reinforcing, interconnected, and integrative architectural solutions, and that is largely where we get into this idea of, or the relationship between biophilic design and resilient design. So to pair that, we can look at the 10 principles of resilient design. And these are from the Resilient Design Institute, adapted version. So I just extracted some of the key issues for each of those 10 principles. We're not going to get into each of these principles independently, but I just wanted to give you an overview to understand the context of where I hope to take this conversation today. So perhaps an easier way to frame the relationship between biophilia and resilience, rather than comparing their principles, is to look at the desired outcomes of biophilic design and how the commonly associated positive externalities and auxiliary benefits happen to be fundamental aspects of resilience. So the relationship is actually quite strong. We just don't necessarily see it in maybe the everyday conversation. When you're talking about a particular pattern, you might not necessarily automatically associate it with resiliency, but I think the roots are there, and so it's more a matter of identifying what those priorities and desired outcomes are, and then you begin to weave it all together. So in the science, just quickly, I wanted to highlight just three studies that really tie together the idea of biophilia and resilience. And these, I guess, largely are on green infrastructure. But in this particular study, looked at cognitive performance of school children in Spain, and how the green area closest to school, in this case, the schoolyards in particular, was indicative of their performance or grades and testing relative to, say, urban parks or their backyards. The schoolyard, a green schoolyard, was the most significant impact in overall school performance, which may suggest that, you know, having greener, the green infrastructure can really support not just our stormwater management and other natural resource management, but also have this public health benefit. That carries true over to things like our rooftops. So these are familiar strategies for green and resilient design, but they also have health benefits. So in this study, researchers looked at the restorative value of looking out a window onto a gray rooftop and then looking out the same window to a rendering, not even a real green rooftop, but a rendering of a green rooftop. And the goal was to understand, like, how quickly can a view to nature reduce stress, normalize your heart rate and such. And a simple rendering like this revealed that it only took about 40 seconds. A 40-second view out the window had the power to a green space, had the power to kind of reset your system, your biological system, and get you refocused. So the implications are quite staggering when you start to think about how, you know, we talk about green roofs for heat reject, or for heat, urban heat island, for stormwater management, and for like urban farming, but they also have these auxiliary benefits as well. And then at the more larger scale or urban scale, we can start looking at studies like this that really begin to understand the impact of the forest, the experience of the forest on the immune system, and how that compares to, you know, walking in a park versus walking in a city. And so in this study, it was learned that not only was there a reduction in pulse rate and systolic blood pressure and cortisol levels from walking in the park, but it also impacted the immune system for 7 days. Well, actually, it was, I think, up to 7 days for women and even longer for men. So the duration of impact, or sorry, the impact actually has a longer duration than just the experience at that time. It has this, you know, it can have lasting effects. So we start thinking, okay, how does this impact our design for urban streetscapes and parks? Like, what, we're not just thinking about habitat, like habitat for animals and birds and or a place to walk, but we're also influencing public health at a larger scale. So there are hundreds of studies that look at biophilic design, and probably just as many that look at resilient design strategies. And so this chart is really meant to just show that there's research out there that looks at different types of health impacts. And as we start to pair them with the natural characteristic or pattern in nature, we can begin to understand how that can translate to a design solution. And this chart really is just kind of an outline of all those impacts and how we might start to apply it to our design. To give it a little bit more structure, we can break up the science down into 3 key categories. Some of you may be familiar with these. If you ever heard Bill Browning speak, he often frames it this way: there's nature in the space, which looks at plants, water, animals, light, things like that. Natural analogs, talking about the material connection with nature, organic forms, and then some complexity and order, which also can get into the nature of the space, which looks at the spatial configurations of the built environment. Here's a close-up of that list. If you're familiar with the 14 patterns of biophilic design, this is the same list with the addition of awe in the 15th pattern. And another way to look at it, as it's discussed in the book Nature Inside, is these experiences of nature. So we really like to talk about biophilic design as experiences and not just things, not just water or light, but the experience of light, the experience of water and texture and so on. So how does this translate to the built environment, and how is it relative to resilience? So I'd like to just walk through a few case studies that come out of the book, plus a few others. And I'm not going to go into detail on them, but I'm more than welcome or more than happy to discuss them further in the Q&A if anyone has any questions. So please don't be shy. So as a residential example, we can look at biophilic design and resilience that overlaps at a personal level. This is, personal resilience. This project in Pennsylvania was specifically charged with integrating more experiences of refuge. Like, they have a beautiful landscape and plenty of opportunities for biophilic design, but what was most important to the client was that they had these refuge spaces. So there are refuge spaces added throughout the house, nooks for reading with a view outside, the overhang for the nook for the sleeping, for the bed, as well as even in the bathroom. So different experiences of refuge throughout the house was fundamental and like kind of the basis of the addition to this project. In retail, this interior was intentionally designed as an escape from the hyper-stimulating urban experience. So it was meant to be calming, and they used the wood. They were trying to create this forest-like experience, hence the title, The Forest. But one of the benefits that came out of it, as explained by Kengo Kuma and Associates, was that the wood actually had a fragrance after it was milled, and they hadn't really counted on that. But it was such an addition to the overall experience that they really were surprised at how effective their design was. So it was really kind of a really pleasant surprise that came out of an initial effort to create mystery and relief from the busy urban street. Another personal resilience example would be in healthcare. The recharge rooms at Mount Sinai Hospitals in New York has a network of hospitals that used Studio Elsewhere to build some temporary refuge spaces for frontline workers. And they incorporated multi-sensory experience of nature, including audio, scent, and these videos, but also the choice of the user to what experience they wanted, what video they wanted to watch, whether they're by the beach or in the desert or watching a bonfire. They got to choose from nine experiences, and so the lighting, audio, and video all adjusted or adapted to the needs of the user. And what's really special about this project was that it was entirely built on this idea of the biophilic experience as a relief, and that it's had such a positive response by the frontline workers that the hospital is currently looking for permanent locations to rebuild and make it just a permanent amenity at their hospitals. One of the responses of the many hundreds of frontline workers that were interviewed was that they feared that once COVID was less of a threat, that this amenity would go away. That was their number one fear in this experience. The other comment was that they shouldn't have a pandemic. They shouldn't need a pandemic to have this resource. They recognized in the first time that they used it that this was an essential resource for them. So it was a really positive outcome from this experiment. And there are 8 locations in New York, and I believe several other hospitals have been adopting this kind of strategy. So, okay, moving on. An educational example would be Green Street Academy in Baltimore, where an extensive year-long study was conducted on biomorphic forms. And what's special about this project is that it really was an interior design project that looked at the impact specifically of fractals in design on student performance. And the chart on the left is obviously quite small and hard to read, but essentially the research showed that the patterns from the Mecco shades, the carpet tiles, and the wall design, as well as an improved exterior landscape, had significant effect on the students' grades. The control classroom on the left, it was the same grade and class work as the Biophilic classroom on the right, and the kids in the classroom on the right had 3 times higher the gain in their test scores than the kids in the control classroom. So other benefits found that teachers started using the Biophilic classroom on their breaks because they found they just had more stress reduction, and they just enjoyed being there more. So we can start thinking about, when kids are improving their test scores, what does that mean for graduation rates? What does that mean for eligibility or ability to gain employment after graduation, going to college, and so on? And how does that translate to resilience in the community? At the community level also is this example of a brown sugar factory in China. The factory itself is actually right in town, but adjacent to rice paddies. And the focus here was the connection to nature, to the landscape. And so during the day, you have a view out to the immediate plantings as well as the distant farm. But in the evening, you don't have that view. So their solution was to etch on forms of local agricultural practices and the people, very appropriate, styled in a way that was culturally appropriate. But the building also functions as a community center. So the picture in the upper right is an example of part of that space that just further connects these different services together. Kids can go play there while their parents work. There are meetings that happen in those spaces, trainings, community training events. So it's kind of this integrated programming that really is the center of the community. Another workplace example that kind of bridges the interior design, biophilic interior design with the ecosystem is the Interface Base Camp in Atlanta, Georgia. This space was specifically designed, it's a renovation project of an old 1970s or 80s building, and the focus was on really having excellent prospect and refuge in the space, or throughout the space, and in parallel, using ecosystem services as a guideline for developing metrics for building performance. So the overlap is not so evident. They are two independent strategies, but ultimately the experience of the space is, they are tied together. The habitat and diversity, for example, really focuses on quality views and daylight and habitat enhancement, not just for the animals and birds on the rooftop, in the rooftop garden, but also for the habitat, for the inhabitants, the human inhabitants. Let's see. In hospitality, I like to use this example because it is appears to be very simple in that it's a window treatment that brings this fantastic lighting into the corridor of a spa in South Carolina. But what makes this an example of resilient design is that most hotels and spas get renovated on a relatively short cycle. This hotel or this spa has not been renovated in 20 years. And so there is that idea of just the resilient nature of the design, the foundational design to begin with. The only thing that's been had to be updated in the last 20 years, I think, is the tapestry in another part of the space, because it is so effective at creating that restorative experience that after 20 years, it's still very effective. Another great example is this one in South Africa of the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary African Art. Heatherwick Studio cut out the center of the silos and did not know what they would find necessarily. And it just naturally created these really strong biomorphic forms. But as central to the community, it becomes this example of reuse, repurpose, but still connected to the culture and the agricultural practices of the community, or the history of the community. So I think it's a great example of resilient design. And I've got two more. Let's see. The High Line, a lot of people are familiar with the High Line as, being the poster child for neighborhood revitalization and economic resurgence. But what I'd like to highlight here is 512 West 22nd Street, which is the commercial building right there in the center. It's an office building designed by Cook Fox, which they wanted a priority in the design strategy was to connect the experience with the High Line. So it's not, there's multiple terraces, of course, and lots of windows and minimal right angles, but there's also outdoor workspace and even the stairs on the exterior. It doesn't really show well here, but there are exterior stairs to the building that are right next to the park. So you get this feeling not just that you have a view to nature, but that you are part of it, that you are that you're on the High Line or with the High Line. So that was a very intentional design feature. And then the very familiar Tanner Springs in Portland, Oregon. This is a great example of integration of a biophilic urban experience with biodiversity and rainwater management, among many other things. And then finally, this example I love is the VAC Library in Hanoi, Vietnam. And I think what's special about this is that similar to other urban park examples, it addresses things like water and vegetation and a place for kids to play, but it also integrates these ideas of early childhood education in reading, animal husbandry, aquaponics. And so you get, there's an opportunity here to, it really bridges or combines this idea of the biophilic experience with resilience, both at the personal, community, and ecosystem level. So in the adoption of biophilic design practices shown here, but regardless of the patterns utilized or the scope of resilience being addressed, I find that these 3 overarching rules of thumb are a great help to keeping a biophilic project on track. So for any one of those those projects just mentioned, and many others, these 3 rules of thumb really came as they really did make a difference. So multiple sensory experience, the personal experience, not just before, like getting to get buy-in from a client or funding or even a design team, but also the personal experience after. What is the personal experience after the project is built? And if you can start to envision that before it's designed, I think you'll have the success rate will be much higher. And then finally, this idea of focusing on just a few patterns. Many people get very excited when they're able to tell me that they were able to incorporate all 14 patterns of biophilic design. And that's really great, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have a more biophilic project. Oftentimes, when there's so much effort to get it all in there, nothing is done so holistically, or not enough attention is put on the desired outcome. So when you're able to focus on just a few patterns, you can really start to emphasize the desired health outcome of that 1 or 2 patterns or experiences. And if there's other patterns that support it, great, but the energy is put on those primary experiences and patterns. Another tool or way to think about biophilic design is to incorporate it into the project master timeline to ensure greater chance of success in the long term. And I feel like this is a conversation that's often had and agreed upon, but rarely actually comes to fruition. So, it's talked about in the beginning of the project, but then everyone has so much on their plate, so many priorities that biophilic design can often be, or at least the steps in ensuring that the outcome is as planned. If you're able to incorporate some of these objectives or actions into your master project timeline, I think that the team will be on board and make sure that together it happens from beginning to end. And with respect to resiliency, this first component, this first section, is probably the most critical. Communication of biophilic goals and their relationship with resilience from leadership right in the beginning, incorporating them into owner project requirements, and then engaging other people, other experts to make sure that it's carried through in each team's agenda and scopes of work. Is really helps with the efficacy of your goals. So the gap analysis is I should back up a second. The book that we just published, Nature Inside, includes a little toolkit at the end of the book that highlights some key tools that are actually perhaps quite familiar to many architects and designers. And so we've just crafted them in a way that they're specific to biophilic design, but could also be to integrate other key goals such as resilience. And so another one one of those tools would be a gap analysis. And gap analysis, of course, have been around for a long time and are not specific to biophilic design, but they're a great and pretty easy thing to, or step to include in any design process. And so one way to look at that would be to look at the different user experiences and how the current experience is or is perceived to be, and then what that target experience is, and what kind of corrective action you might take. And that could be applied to an existing space or building, as well as to design plans. Another way to look at this might be based on desired health outcome, or resilience issue, or space type. So there's a number of ways that can be done, but when it is laid out this way, different disciplines can all be on board with the same goal. So I think it's just a really helpful tool to lay things out for everybody speaking the same language. So there are, just as an additional resource, there are a number of other tools in the book. That is it for the presentation. Nature Inside is the book that just came out. 14 Patterns of Biophilic Design was published in 2014, and gets into some of the design aspects and science, specific, some of the studies that we talked about here, but also several others. And then a new pattern language for growing regions is by Michael Mehaffey, and it came out last year, or maybe it was in January this year. And it's also a great resource. It kind of follows Christopher Alexander's pattern language in its structure, but touches on everything from interior design to architectural design, urban planning, taxation, and policy. So it's really, it really helps bridge. And biophilic design is in there as well. So it's a nice bridge between biophilic design, architecture, resilience, and urban planning. So I would recommend that book as well to anybody interested. So Monique, that's the end of my presentation. But as I understand it, we have a nice chunk of time for Q&A. So I'm ready and willing. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. I have to say, from my point of view, I love the fact that you said biophilia isn't just throwing everything but the kitchen sink in there in regards to water, light, and all that stuff, but it's really a multisensory experience of the elements. I think that's such a valuable statement. So with that, I'll stop hogging the screen and we'll go to the questions for you. So one of the questions we have is, shouldn't resilient design include quick or immediate adaptation for emergency situations?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously you can't always have that, but I would say that, well, the example that was shown for the frontline workers, Mount Sinai recharge rooms, is actually a pretty good example of that. It was quickly deployed and easily replicable, but isn't necessarily appropriate for everywhere, and no solution would be. One of the issues that there's two ways of looking at this, I think. One is that from a general, like, personal resilience, mental health standpoint, there are certain things that you can do in your home, in your workplace, and as well as the schools and everywhere else, urban settings, that support healthy living and community vitality all the time. And so when you have at least the community resilience aspect of it, when there is a physical disaster, natural disaster, or a pandemic, you have a healthier community network to reach out to. So if that doesn't exist to begin with, then the natural disaster is harder to respond to. So they're very related in that sense. So if you can get people's, the good landscape design that that looks at human or mental health experience of the space, the right balance of prospect and refuge, and some of those spatial characteristics in the home, in the workplace, and so on, then that'll play out. So those are more longer term solutions that allow immediate response, like healthy immediate response. But for the quick deployment, I feel like one of the areas that I'm actually quite interested in is how do we think about some of our more civic spaces, hospitals, hotels especially, how they might be able to adapt quickly to support community needs. So if we think about the design of a hotel, not just for the visitors and the people who work there at the time on your typical day, but also thinking long-term, okay, well, what happens when a disaster does hit this community? How is this hotel going to respond? And so if they have the right infrastructure to support that, whether it's, restorative spaces, or if it's energy and water resources that can support the community needs at the time. I think it's definitely an integrative approach, but I think when you're talking about quick deployment, you actually have to start with the foundational infrastructure. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's amazing. I think it answers the question and gives some really great insight on some additional things. Our next question is, have you found that if natural elements are too abstracted from their original form within a biophilic design, that the natural elements end up having a reduced impact on the end user? And are there increased benefits from being more true to form?
Well, I could respond in a number of ways. One is to challenge what the original form is. Like, what is our perception of the original form? Because that might vary for everybody, depending on your culture, your age, your experience. So that's more philosophical. But I think we can't necessarily reduce it down to objects, which is why I like to talk about them as experiences. And the reality is that every application is going to be different, which is one of the challenges in getting like the science behind it, because every study is focusing on something slightly different. But if you're talking about, well, do I include trees or water or light, or reducing it to a single thing does strip out the naturalness of it, if you can use that word. But I think it really depends on how you approach it, and your openness to, or just remembering that this is about connecting to nature, and it's not a plug and play. It's not checking off the boxes, which is what, gets back to that idea of having this long list and be like including everything. That's a checkbox approach that unfortunately does not work for biophilic design, because you're talking about experience, and everyone's experience is going to be a little different. The application's different. So short answer is, yeah, it can strip it down, but ultimately, I think it's our job as designers and thought leaders and just people to really remind ourselves that we need to think about the relationships between people and nature, as well as these different elements of nature and how they work together.
No, awesome. I love that answer. All right, so number 3, you have a lot of questions here, so you have a lot of interest in this topic. So we see seasonal changes in nature. We see natural change due to extreme events like hurricanes and wildfires. Should biophilic design strive for a temporal quality to align with the human experience?
Short answer is absolutely. Okay. The seasonality, I think, definitely connects us to place. I love tropical plants, but when I'm in a place that's really cold outside and I'm surrounded by tropical plants, there's a little bit of a oddity to it. Actually, I'm really cold right now, and my office is filled with tropical plants. So, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But I think if we want to get back to this idea of stewardship and this understanding of what the natural environment is, we have to be able to nurture an understanding of natural systems and how they influence the built environment and how the built environment influences them. So being able to connect people indoors to the natural systems outdoors, the seasons, the diurnal process, like cycles and so on. I think it's really crucial to both our understanding of nature, our willingness to take care of it and invest in it, but also just to understand our own place in it.
Awesome. Okay, so next one is, since humans are land animals, have you found that there is a stronger benefit for land-based natural elements versus water-based elements? Very curious to see your answer on that.
That's the first time I've ever been asked that question.
Okay.
I would say that it depends on your location.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have, even if you're on land, but your community or your lifestyle is largely at sea or near sea, that incorporating marine characteristics would be very appropriate. Mm-hmm. Often we'll see projects in more remote area, or I should say more removed from their elements, whether it's, aquatic themed environments far from water, or mountain or desert experiences far from mountains or deserts. And, there is value in that. It's a reminder, it's a connector. So I think part of it is, what is the intent of your project? Is it really about education, like educating people who live in the desert about the ocean? Or so this is what it feels like when you live by the ocean, or these are the experiences that you might have if you were to be a turtle. So what are the goals? But if the goal is simply to connect to place, which is often how we see stewardship of that place come to bear, having aquatic features may not necessarily be the right solution. But more importantly would be, what are the natural resources and risks of that area? So having a large aquarium might be a fantastic experience to offer in a workplace, or a giant water fountain or something like that. But if you're in Arizona, in an area where the aquifers are largely depleted, it's not only going to be hard to maintain that, but it may not be telling the right message. Like, how are we using our natural resources in a place where, water isn't actually, isn't readily available. So it's not just about the connection to place or the biophilic experience, but it's also, there is definitely a relationship between the physical resilience and ability of the land to support your messaging. So maybe instead of having a waterfall or fountain, you have a representation of something like that, and then educating occupants about why, or what why this design is important.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so has there been much study of human age as it relates to biophilic design? And does one generation tend to benefit more than another? Like, does one generation tend to appreciate it better than the other, or?
There is some research that I'm aware of that looks at different age and how certain experiences might benefit certain age groups more than others. I wouldn't say it's widely studied, and even when there are multiple studies, they tend to be studying different things. Like daylight, for example, is heavily studied, and the studies show that blocking or, how wearing sunglasses, for young people wearing sunglasses is not actually a good thing. At least not wearing them too much, because then their eyes don't get to develop the way that, people don't understand enough about the human eye to determine whether cutting off access to natural daylight is actually going to do more harm than it does good. So there is some research out there. I wouldn't say there is a complete body of research. Another example is that certain biophilic design patterns have a greater impact, or a different kind of impact on men than it does women, or children versus adults. And so certain qualities of mystery, for example, mystery is a great example in that case, like spaces or community areas that might be a little darker, or might be intriguing to a kid or to a man, but not to a woman. So how you apply those patterns really is important depending on your audience. Then the mystery can also be, the kids are really curious and they're willing to take risks, but people who are 80 might not be, they've done that, or they're just not as curious. So, or they're more prone to, they're not as comfortable with risk. So yes is the short answer, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of research out there. But I definitely would say that your design solution should be gender and age sensitive when necessary, as well as health. Health issues can also be, certain healthcare facilities. Some design solutions might not be appropriate.
Okay, perfect. We have a couple more, two more. So I appreciate that nature never goes out of style, and the spa doesn't require renovation. Designing with Biophilia saves money and improves performance in all markets. What are the barriers for implementation, education of professionals, and why isn't this taken more seriously? Throw that at you.
Okay, so my response to that is join my green build session on November 12th.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, there is, our session is called How to Sell Biophilia, and we look at, that is one of the key questions that we try to answer. And, but in the meantime, I would say that it's, the science is often what some people need. They like the idea of it, but they need the science. Other people need case studies or examples of it in practice. And in both cases, like, that information exists to a degree, but not necessarily exactly how you would apply it. So it's never going to be apples to apples. So it's kind of, there's a lot of intuition, a little bit of economics, a little bit of, evidence-based, just design precedents. But I know one really effective way to do it, I know it might be a little harder these days, as certainly when travel is limited, but bringing somebody to a place, like the person you're trying to get buy-in from, bringing them to that experience. It doesn't have to be exactly what you're trying to achieve. It doesn't have to be the same type of building or place that you're trying to recreate. But if there's an experience that you want to incorporate and you're trying to get buy-in, bring that person or those people to a place where they can have that experience. And personal experience being one of those 3 rules of thumb is one of the most effective ways to get buy-in.
Yeah, I love the fact that I think prior, a lot of people think biophilic design is just throw a plant in there or a fountain or something. And I love how you've explained today that it's just been extremely methodical, and it's a process, and it's an experience that's from the beginning to the end to really truly be a positive impact on the user. So we really want to thank you, Catie, for your time. This has been so amazing. I'm sure all of our minds just with all this amazing information. Thank you for letting us know about the November 12th speaking. I'm sure we'll attend that as well. So thank you so much again for all your time and commitment and information. I want to remind everybody to please let Justin know what your AIA number is so you can get credit for it. And one really exciting thing is that we are doing donations to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So far, we've gotten $1,680. But what's even more amazing is that Legat is doubling it. So whatever we get, we're going to double. So we're actually at $3,360. So that's really great for all those kids that or people that are affected by it. And then I also want to remind you that Friday we have our roundtable discussion. So I know there was a couple other questions for Catie. So sorry we couldn't get to that today, but we can definitely shoot it her way on Friday with a roundtable. We also have a couple more think tanks Thursday and Wednesday. So please sign up for those. And we thank you all for the time. I'm sure I missed something, but thank you again, everybody. We really, really, really appreciate your time.
See you Friday.
Sounds amazing. Thanks, Catie. Have a good day. Bye, everybody.